block. Dude, that part is so hard. Dude, I don't even know how I did this. Oh my god. When we are faced with challenges, there are many different ways that we respond. Some people continue approaching the challenge the same way, become frustrated, and end up quitting, while others may continue to attempt the challenge over and over again until eventually they get the result they're looking for. Out of the many different ways we can overcome a challenge, one of the most effective ways is reflection. Reflection plays a very important role in the experience that the player has while playing the game. Some games are particularly challenging, requiring a significant amount of skill and knowledge in order to overcome said challenge. Acquiring the knowledge for a challenge that you are struggling with can be a breaking point for most players, as it requires time and dedication in order to overcome. This is why so many people are turned off by the Dark Souls series. A main staple of the Dark Souls series is how unforgiving the difficulty is in the game as a whole, and how the game poses you with various amounts of challenges throughout your playthrough. Whether it's moving from area to area, or encountering a difficult boss fight that you struggle to get through, this can be a frustrating experience for most players, as it requires constant death and failure in order to overcome. Since we typically dislike failure, we tend to avoid these type of games if we only see failure and not able to overcome these struggles. Reflection helps alleviate this issue of constant failure, such that we can learn from our mistakes and overcome the challenges in a timely manner. If reflection is an easy answer to overcome these kind of challenges in video games, then why does the average player not finish these games? It's because the games themselves do not prompt reflection, but rather the player. When you die in a game, the game doesn't just say, you know, maybe if you didn't climb that ladder and avoid every single enemy in the area, you wouldn't have died there. But it's up to the player to find their own solution. This is specifically tied to players' motivations, which is the main reason why reflection happens in games. We first will go through why video games undermine the reflection process in games, and why motivation is a key element to the reflection process. To first understand why motivation is such a big part in games, we must first understand reflection and its role in games. Reflective thought, as defined by Dewey as active, persistent, and careful consideration of any belief or a supposed form of knowledge in the light of the grounds that support it, and further conclusions to which it tends. In layman's terms, this means reflective thought that draws conclusion based on careful consideration of previous knowledge. In games, this comes in forms of any kind of experience that makes you carefully consider your actions in order to change them next time. Some key triggers of this are death and game over screens, emotionally impactful scenes, or games that make us question our belief system. Whatever that may be, the keyword here is careful consideration. If there is no careful consideration done, then reflection has no meaning, as you cannot come to a new conclusion with your newfound knowledge. This is the main cause of why games can mean so much for one person and significantly less for another. One can experience a story-driven game and reflect on their experience with the various challenges they faced, how the game emotionally impacted them, and how the various themes were intricately woven into the story, while another person could just say, yeah, that was a good game. When we play games, reflection is something that players have to go out of their way to engage with. Similarly to books, video games are an appropriate vehicle to enable our reflection and require us to seek more in order to get something meaningful out of it. But the games themselves don't necessarily inspire us as much as we would like to. In doing research for this video, I came across a study that highlights how gamers have been doing reflection. Researchers at the University of Basel conducted a study on how much reflection a player experiences. They surveyed 19 semi-structured interviews consisting of both men and women gamers of various levels of experience with games. Some were game designers, professional esports players, game researchers, and players that just had an interest in gaming. One of the questions that was asked of them is if they have ever intentionally reflected on their gaming experience. The answer that was given closely mirrored Schoen's notion of reflection on action and reflection in action. Simply put, reflection on action is reflection on something that has already happened before, but outside of the gaming experience, while reflection in action is reflection during the gaming experience. To give a good example of this, say I'm in a tournament playing against a single opponent. I give it my best but ultimately lose the match. After suffering such a devastating loss, thoughts of sadness, anger, frustration rush into your head, and then once your initial feelings subside, you think about what you could have done better in the set. Maybe you just think about it, maybe you ask a friend for some guidance or look at the match again and see what you could have done better. This is what reflection on action is about. On the other hand, reflection in action is the opposite of this. Games that do this the best are puzzle games, or any kind of game that requires critical thinking skills in order to progress in the game. In a game like Portal, you really have to think about how to get past each room of the game, otherwise you wouldn't be able to progress. You could potentially do this outside of the game, but puzzle games typically give you room for you to reflect. You're not necessarily pressured to solve each and every puzzle immediately, which is why you're free to think about a solution during the experience. Both of these methods of action require the player to initiate the process. Most of the time, games are designed to keep you playing and engaged rather than to reflect on the experience at hand. Game design nowadays has been undermining reflection as a whole, which makes it difficult for games that we play to prompt the reflection process. Some of the ways that game design affects reflection are by the immersion that they provide, the way that they try to satisfy every player, as well as a way to quantify motivations. Immersion is something that's very important to video games, and without them, some video games wouldn't be what they are today. Getting immersed in a great story is one of the main reasons why I love video games so much. You tend to be so immersed, in fact, that sometimes you prioritize a game that you're playing over more important matters. Like this video. But here lies the bigger problem. Some games can be too immersive. Games that maximize immersion do so at the cost of reflection. In games that have a lot of immersion, you can become attached to the characters, so much so that you identify with them. If you play a game where the main character is almost a reflection of your own actions, it can become hard to step back and reflect on some of the choices that you're making. You feel as if you are being persuaded to make these decisions and accept the consequences of your actions, even though that might not be something that you, the player, will want to choose. When a player becomes too immersed in the game, they lose focus on the ability to reflect on what is actually happening to them in the game. In more recent times, a common trend has been games getting easier over time. If you were to compare a game like the original Legend of Zelda to the Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, for example, you can tell that Skyward Sword is probably the more easy game to play. Game designers do this intentionally because they're trying to make it so that everyone can enjoy the games that they play. The only problem is, with the wide skill range of players to please, it becomes challenging to make a game that everyone can play regardless of skill level. Making a game that appeals to the more unskilled players makes the gameplay for the skilled players less rewarding and trivial in some cases. Since more skilled players breeze through these games with ease, there is no need to have reflection since they are not trying to overcome a challenge of any sort. You can see that there's a lot of new game mechanics that are being introduced. Games that take away a permadeath mechanic that previously had them before, games that allow autosaves and frequent save points, and even games that change the difficulty based on how well you are performing are all mechanics that make the lower skilled player base want to continue playing their game. For players that are more skilled than the average player, it makes it difficult for this group to have meaningful reflections on their gameplay experience. The way that games quantify motivations also draw away from the reflection that we may experience. What do I mean by quantifying motivation? It's more like an artificial or secondary motivation that's built into the game. Think of games that have some sort of alignment system. As you progress through the game, the various actions you take change your alignment and influence the outcome of the game. With systems like these, some players can choose to pick options that benefit one side of the alignment instead of trying to pick a mix of options and not knowing which alignment or ending that they'll get. This also takes away from the reflection of your actions because you're just picking options that you think will satisfy the alignment that you want to go for. There's no need to reflect on the options that you choose since it ultimately doesn't matter to you. Another way that designers encourage this is with achievements and trophies that can be obtained throughout the game. One thing I find myself doing a lot is look at achievements when I first start a game, and after seeing them, I plan my playthrough around them to see if I can get as much of them as possible in one playthrough, so I don't have to go through the game again. Adding something like achievements to the game can really take away from the reflection because your gameplay experience isn't an accurate reflection on how you would want to play the game, but rather how the designers assume a person that goes above and beyond would play the game. You could reflect on the experience that you have in trying to complete each achievement and how difficult each one is. But the kind of experience isn't something that is uniquely to you, but rather how the developers want you to play. In short, there are many ways that game design takes away from our need and ability to reflect, but that doesn't mean that gamers still reflect on and during their experience. Reflection is still a vital part of games, but how is it that games motivate us to do this then? If game designers are making it so we spend less time reflecting on the gameplay experience, then what motivates us to reflect in the first place? Games are simply the catalyst that inspire us to reflect on our experiences. What do I mean by this? I mean that games often put us in scenarios that lead to our need for reflection. To illustrate my point, let me talk about a game I play frequently, Osu. For those that haven't heard of this game, all you really need to know is that Osu is a rhythm game. A typical Osu playing session for me usually goes like this. I open up the game, choose a random song, play it. If I don't get a score that I think is satisfactory for the first time, I play it again, and again, and again, until I get a score that I'm satisfied with. During each of my attempts on any given song, I'll usually make a note in my head about how well I'm doing, as well as after the song I play and see if there's anything else I can do better next time. As I mentioned before, both reflection in and on action are present here. But how does the game make me reflect? With rhythm games, one of the most important features is feedback. Feedback is everywhere, and whether that be the individual judgments on each note and the real-time score that's updated while you're playing, or the score that is displayed at the end of each song. This feedback tends to affect the player's emotions, whether it be good or bad. For example, if I see a score with 100% accuracy, I'm excited about the score that I got. On the other hand, if I get a significantly lower score than I expected, then I don't feel the greatest about the score. These emotions that we experience motivate us to potentially reflect on the experience. If I get a score that was difficult for me to achieve and something that I'm proud of, I'll be questioning how I even managed to do that in the first place and how I can replicate that for future scores that I'll go for. On the other hand, getting negative feedback such as failing a song or not getting the score I want will cause me to think about what I should do better and how I should do better the next time I play the song. These are all ways that feedback intrinsically motivates me to reflect on the gameplay experience. The built-in features of the game don't cause me to reflect, but rather my own emotions and intentions that cause me to reflect on my own experience. For competitive 1v1 communities such as the Smash community, something that is important is how you rank amongst your fellow competitors. Whether that be a global ranking or just a local or state ranking, competitors usually set goals for themselves with these rankings in mind. When it comes to ranking, some players will do anything that it takes to reach the top. Rankings usually depend on how well you do at major tournaments and what players you are able to win against. If for some reason you feel as if you're not gaining the results for the rank that you're trying to get, it can potentially lead to you reflecting. This reflection can come in many forms, such as questioning how you're going to beat a player that you lost to in the past and figuring out how you might want to beat them the next time, deciding if the character that you are playing is truly the one that you can consistently win with or not, and if you should switch to someone else, or simply finding flaws in your own gameplay and learning how to overcome them. These are all motivations that are built outside of the boundaries of the game, but all stem from the same game that all of your other fellow competitors are playing. Rankings such as community-run global rankings is more of an intrinsic motivation that can cause us to reflect on our own gameplay experience. The way that the game is designed does not prompt us to reflect, but rather the emotions that they make us feel and how it may intrinsically or extrinsically motivate us. The way that video games make us reflect are more based on a player's motivations to reflect rather than the game design themselves forcing them or encouraging us to do so. This is a completely normal phenomena, because if games really wanted for us to reflect on every little thing that happens, the games wouldn't be very enjoyable. Video games are made to be these little independent spaces where you can find your own unique attachment and hopefully experience the game that is special to you. Finding the right balance of intervention is hard for most developers, but ultimately what decides whether or not we should reflect on our gaming experience is how the game influences our emotions and motivates us to seek reflection.